Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today where we'll be covering the top 5 reasons for automating document production. I'm Lois McCluckie from HotDocs. During this webinar, if you've got any questions, please type them into the question pane of the GoToWebinar panel and we will answer as many as we can at the end. Your presenter today is Lloyd Wyngard from the HotDocs Global Services team. Lloyd works with HotDocs clients every day, helping them to achieve the best results with HotDocs. I will now hand you over to Lloyd to take you through the presentation.
Thank you for that, Lois, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So as Lois mentioned, we're going through the top 5 reasons to automate document production. So with that in mind, I think what's important is just to sort of set out the offset of, framing why we're actually looking at this as a topic. So when looking at document automation, there are a few key overarching benefits that come to mind effectively when we're considering the topic. So that is how efficiently your users can go from document creation to document generation, the time that can be saved between the actual reduction of one task to allow for focus on another, and the control that can be implemented around all the parts that lead to that generated document. So with these in mind, we'll just be going into the top 5 benefits themselves in more detail, as you can see on the left there. So first one here, minimizing risk. So with risk mitigation comes an objective to provide an ease of mind for all involved, primarily by controlling the variable rules through the document creation process. Such rules are things like validation, so restricting progression of generating documents based on document framework logic. So making sure if you've got a solution that gives the user an option to put in information to generate a document, how do you make sure that they're not skipping any fields, they're not going somewhere they shouldn't be, and they have to go in a structured approach. Contextual errors. So one thing, it's great to be able to have that validation in place for kind of requirements that you define within a document framework, but how do you actually apply that to your business rules that are applicable to your organization? So for example here, where you've got multiple different products of the same type, that in a system it would know not to let you go past based on a certain option, but obviously from your perspective you are able to determine whether or not certain options can be met that a system wouldn't be able to identify unless you put in those kind of custom errors. And then formatting instructions, so in the form of prompts to alert users of things like incorrect input types or incorrect variables that they may put in. So being able to say, not just validating what a user can put information into and making sure they have, but also validating the information they put into it is of the appropriate type. So not named numerical values over set numerical values themselves, if that's a kind of field, as you can see. So naturally, where we have risk mitigation, we have compliance. So with that in mind, enhanced compliance is one of the next reasons that we were talking about for adopting automation. So with compliance comes a whole different set of considerations, albeit intrinsically linked to the controlling of risk. Those considerations would fall in the categories of conditionality. So for example, we spoke previously about the validation of questions, but in terms of how that gets presented and what you might want to do with the conditions in a document framework, conditionality is based on the parts of your document or framework that are mandated by the regional standards or regulations. So you can input conditions in a document framework that allow you to determine what output answer should be, what questions should be. So for example, if say you're looking at, and we've got a few examples of this further in the documents, I'll use it as an example. If you're looking at, say, an insurance company over in the US, you could have business logic within HotDocs or another tool of that matter to ensure that specific details are included in any policy or claims documents relevant to a specific state. So insurance compliance within state-specific law is implemented based on a user's selection of a field within some kind of data capture system. So being able to standardize things regionally, in terms of compliance and regulation that apply to your organization, your users. Another consideration that could be tied to compliance could be, and maybe not directly to your document frameworks that you're generating, but to the actual automation software itself that you've implemented, could be forward publishing, or in essence the indirect conditions through the tools themselves. So rather than applying conditions to your documents, it's having conditions in the software that you use to actually manage those expectations of users as they go through the tool itself, and to make sure you can reduce the risk on your side and ensure the compliance. So for example, forward publishing documents, say 6 months from now, so that when GDPR comes in, or an X number of months forward, when say Brexit regulations come in and you need to implement those documents from a certain date, you can forward publish to those systems, so you know that if any user goes into your system begins to generate a document, they will always have that standard, most up-to-date version of the document framework they would be using. And that kind of ties into the third point as well, which is around versioning of document frameworks themselves. So I mentioned there about document frameworks and being able to forward publish them into the platform of your choice, but then also obviously what you may want to do is have that full version control within the platform itself. So being able to extract the document framework effectively from the actual document and apply versioning control to it, so that 6 months down the line, if you can manage those versions, a user can go in and see when new versions come into play. A user can go in and see if they create a document, say, they know what version's actually live, what one they'll be using. So there's a bit of confidence that can be put into both the user and the author from that perspective. And following on from compliance, when it comes to saving time and reducing costs, which are the next two reasons to adopt document automation, these two benefits kind of go hand in hand with the solution you adopt and how it's implemented effectively. And with HotDocs, we have managed to achieve a broad global presence over time, leading to many varied implementations, including across varying sectors, and ultimately multiple case studies as a byproduct of this. So what you can see within this slide is a few of such case studies where we've implemented HotDocs in these kind of scenarios in the past to help save time as well, to meet the requirement from some of our customers looking to save time with the implementation. So you can see below a couple of global banking examples, one of which time was saved per user and the other per the creation of facility documents, so per user and per task, and you can see the metrics on screen there. And just for a bit of context, this is across multiple thousands of users. So when we say global banks, we're actually talking about upwards of 5-figure sums for users actually carrying out day-to-day work, and hence you'll see in the next slide how that sort of ties into the cost as well aspect, because it all does add up the more time that goes into it. But then similarly within the US, we have managed to save time off of the creation of loan packets. We would have previously taken 3 days to create one packet, now only takes 15 days per document for some of our other US banks that we work with. So there's different ways we've implemented it to achieve improved task and turnover, as well as staff optimization in terms of their workloads. But going over to the insurance sector within the US, again, we have a client with more than 1,000 staff using about 980 different HotDocs templates or document frameworks, as you may be related to. And due to that, they generate more than 500,000 of correspondence letters each year from this implementation, of which the time to do so has been reduced by about 125,000 hours, as you can see on the screen there, collectively per year, through the increase in efficiency they had through the implementation of HotDocs that was categorized for them. So it's about putting it in the right way that saves them the most amount of time. There's no use just to have the solution in place. It's about shaping it around that business requirement. Oops. Sorry, jumped off the slide there. And then another one we've got here is around the legal sector. So jumping from insurance to law, the specific AmLaw 200 firm employs 500 attorneys across 13 US offices and uses HotDocs in multiple divisions. And again, with their implementation of HotDocs, they managed to reduce the time between the creation of wills, trusts, and other documents associated to estate planning. So again, specifically focused around their requirements, but ultimately saving time just through that kind of implementation. And then finally, in terms of local governments, a bit more of a streamlined example here, but this large local organization we work with in England, over in the UK, manages multiple HR documentations within HotDocs, and subsequently they are now reduced, and now we've seen an 80% reduction in the time spent creating said HR documents since the use of the software began. And they've really gone ahead and pioneered the whole HR solution within their constituents in their local area through the adoption of this and the way they implemented it. And as mentioned, reducing costs come hand in hand with the benefits we have just outlined on the next slide. So you'll see that within here we've actually got the costs implemented as well per those exact same stories, like I said, that we implemented in the previous slide. So you can see through the reflection of costs saved to each of those individual organizations. So the first one we've got here, our first banking client managed to save almost 700K per year in salary value, so through the actual optimization of staff. So basically the work they were able to optimize allowed them to avoid having to hire 23 new heads, per the requirements they had, optimizing the cost that was returned through those salary values. But then similarly, the second banking client we had there holds about 500 HotDocs users who managed to save about £76 per head per day based on the efficiency tied to prioritization, which means again, around 38,000 saved on staff time in total every working day, purely based on the amount of time they can work on one document and then move on to another task through the day. And as you can see, we've got another one here. The US bank currently saves $250,000 per day on the production of loan agreements. So this is purely through optimization, purely through taking the huge amount of document frameworks they had, converting them into HotDocs templates and implementing a solution that allows them to more efficiently go through the generation of documents from them. And then going down again back into Assure that we mentioned from the AM Law category there in the top 200, they've managed to reduce the cost of staff used to produce documents by over 2 million per year. So again, another element of just reducing the number of staff required, the tasks required, based on an efficient system in place. And then I guess going on to the next one, you can see through the use of cases just discussed. I'm going through here in the incorrect order. So although cost and time reflections and benefits in of them say themselves, these do heavily rely on, of course, the competency and reliability of the tool. So from that perspective, like I echoed multiple times through those two sections, the implementation of the software really defines the save you make, both in time and money, and obviously in relation to the other reasons also. And then finally, it comes to standardization in terms of that fifth reason to adopt it. So we can take varying forms from this depending on the organization itself. However, within a document automation solution, the functionality that really ensures the enforcement at this point is a tool's ability to intelligently control the following. So when I say that, I'm talking about things like branding, structure, headers, footers, logos, and fonts, and so on. In a sense, controlling what parts of a document are standardized and what parts a user is able to interact with and change. So having that structured document that you know a user cannot interact with this as they may have done in the past when you've got your document repository and you just pull out older version documents. But then also another one here is document output, so the ability to know how and when to output what type of document in whichever document format is required. So things like being able to have your tool produce a docx document as an end result, or a PDF, or even in some cases things like HTML or RTF for different varying reasons for the output you're looking to achieve. And then finally, the clause abstraction. So being able to separate out T's and C's, definitions, regulatory content, and so on, and centrally manage the appearance of such elements within multiple documents. So you can see on there, having a single document framework that can be intrinsically tied to multiple other core documents that you would use to generate your end documents that you're looking for, and ultimately being able to manage that centrally. And that's effectively it when we go through the top 5 reasons that we would say. So when we look at it that way, there's multiple different ways you can approach it. It's really about taking those 5 reasons into consideration, looking at the solutions you have available to you, and finding the best way to fit that solution within your organization. And this is effectively, when we tie it back to ourselves, obviously, why you should consider HotDocs as an option in this space. And in terms of use cases, we cater to multiple different types of users, basically template authors and standard user cases. What I'm outlining for you here is how those 2 user cases effectively translate into the HotDocs software. So primarily you've got content authors, and these are the people who will take your document frameworks as they are and convert them into what we call HotDocs templates. And by the creation of HotDocs templates, you then have a core standardized document template that you can provide to users, who can then easily and intuitively go into interview sessions that they can put information into. You can connect with external or internal systems, and you can use to easily produce documents, either individually or a suite of such, both of which at either stage saves the content that you put in, saves the answers that your authors generate through their document templates, or the users put into the interview. So being able to go back on all of that information as needed. But in terms of the legacy itself with HotDocs, so when we look at it that way, there's a few different points to bear in mind. One of which is we've got over 1 million users currently worldwide through 11,000 customers that we actively work with today, with many more currently coming in concurrently. And we're also a pioneer in the global market that we work within. So we would see ourselves as one of the proprietors of document automation. It was something that we really brought into the whole commercialized side of the industry back 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago now. And we're currently deployed in over 60 countries because of it, with offices in the UK and the US, and a large network of over 60 partners. So when we say that, we mean we've got our businesses across the planet, or we've got our customers across the planet, but also we've got partnerships across there, so that if you want to work in local regions with people that you want to work who understand your own localizations in terms of how you operate, then we have those connections there to pass on and to work with as well. And then finally, proven technology across what you might have already imagined, the varying sectors that we are predominantly within: banking, legal, insurance, and so on, with 60% of our market share in the legal sector currently maintained, and that's within the US. So anyone who's looking for a document automation solution in the US, 60% of those users typically come to HotDocs as a solution. 4 of the 5 top global banks, and that's excluding China, but ultimately it's quite a substantial gain from our perspective and a good partnership we've had so far with all of them currently. And 8 of the 10 top 15 global insurance companies actively work with us also. And then finally, to tie it all together, the gold certified partnership with Microsoft. So as you would imagine, we can get a look at, say, Word 2017 or so on, any kind of newer versions that come out, and we can optimize our software for those before commercial release to the public. And then also our cool vendor award from Gartner, which is always a nice cherry on the cake. And then in terms of where HotDocs exists currently, like we said, you've seen a few examples. You've mentioned some, specifically clients we couldn't publicly show, but certainly here are a few of the names that we can look at and we can openly reference and are openly referenced within our site in certain areas. So you can see varying large customers: RBS, Ceridian, LexisNexis, and so on, Department of Justice, all of which have a requirement for that and have been integrated into multiple ways with HotDocs. And you'll see that in the next slide. So we go on to there, what it looks like from a technical perspective. So ultimately, HotDocs relies on a core assembly engine that needs to be set up somewhere, whether that's within your on-premise server environment or it's within the cloud. We need to have that core assembly engine, and once we do, that is what will interpret intelligently your document frameworks and turn that into documents ultimately. But in order for it to be able to pass that power onto your users, we have a services layer built on top of it that has multiple different arms stretching out for it in the form of REST API services that allow your users to interact with natively a HotDocs portal that we can present to them and we call the hub. Or alternatively, if you've got other systems or your own portals you need to connect the power of HotDocs with in terms of the core assembly power, then that's also achievable, and it's something we actively have done in the past and something we pride ourselves with our partnerships in as well. So you'll typically see people like K2 have proprietary HotDocs integration connectors or service brokers built into them also. So there's a few different examples like that. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time and now open the floor to any questions you may have, just specifically around the reasons or HotDocs as a whole.
Thank you, Lloyd. So there's been a couple of questions that have come in. If anyone has any others, please just type them into the question pane on the GoToMeeting panel. So Lloyd, could we ask please, does HotDocs work with highly complex documents?
Absolutely. So loan agreements, mortgage agreements, anything that has multiple levels of complexity, not just complex documents from the offset, but something with multiple levels of complexity, we find that's a strong point with the software. And it's really about understanding what's the best way of tackling it, which is typically how we engage with customers in the first instance, but certainly yes.
Great, thank you. And somebody else has asked, how many documents can you create with HotDocs?
So from that perspective, there's no limit from that. You know, once you've got the actual templates developed, once you've got them stored and your users are able to access them from some kind of portal somewhere or directly from the tool, there's no limit to the amount they can create.
That's great. And can you create more than one document at a time?
Absolutely. So depending the way you want to go, you can go in and create multiple different documents, multiple different types of documents, and the end result can be a single document, multiple documents, and there's no kind of restrictions that we see from users doing that when they're doing it either via the tool itself or from the online platform.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. So that's all the questions that we've had. It just remains to say thank you to everybody once again for attending this webinar, and we will let you know when there's a recording available of it so that you can either watch it again or send on to any colleagues who might be interested. Thanks again.
Thank you all.